Hello, I am going to attempt to edit these pictures of Shonda's. You can see they are very dark. She was working in a later time of the day and there was a lot of trees around, so the lighting, this one's backlit, so you know the couple's really dark. I'm just going to show you how I would edit these. She uses Atlas presets, so we will use Atlas presets. I think she said she used Atlas 1, so let's do that. So I don't want to bring this up too much. I'm just clicking and dragging on the exposure right here to bring it up. That will bring up the overall exposure for the whole image. I prefer to keep my images a little bit darker and maintain the shadows and blacks. So I'm just going to crop this because this junk down here in the water, the highlights down there, are a distraction. Your eye will be led to them because they're bright. So I'm going to crop those out, and I'm just going to make sure the couple is centered here. If you what I would do is hit L on my keyboard and it goes into lights out mode. If you right click anywhere around the image, that's not how you do it. Right here, no, that's not how you do it either. Huh, it must be in the preferences. I'll show you how to do that, but the default would be a black screen. I just like mine white, but either way you can see if you hit lights out mode once by hitting L on your keyboard, it will fade the screen, and then if you hit it twice, it will completely get rid of all the background, so you can adjust your crop how you want it. You can see better how the crop looks, and then when you're done, you just hit L to take you back, and then if you hit R, it will set the crop. I'm noticing up here that there's a bunch of chromatic aberration going on in this tree, and it's because the sun is behind it. But her lens has caused this like magenta chromatic aberration. So if you go down here to lens corrections, you can click on remove chromatic aberration and see how that does. It didn't really do much. If I click it off, click it back on, it's kind of bothering me. So I think what I'm going to do is go to the HSL panel and the saturation, and I'm just going to click this little doohickey, which gives me this little tool, and you can see the little crosshairs are the target. So if you watch while I drag it over, you can see over here the colors that I'm hovering over will be highlighted. So you can see like here is yellow, this is magenta. So what I'm going to do is just click and drag down, and it will reduce the saturation of the magenta in the picture. It'll reduce all the magenta in the picture. So I'm going to drag that all the way down. This is probably red, yeah. Drag that down just a little bit. And then I'm going to click this tool again to dock it back there. But now that got rid of most of that magenta. So, oh, you also have a bunch of green chromatic aberration there. But that doesn't bother me as much because these trees are supposed to be green. So now you can see this looks just a little bit more natural to me. If you click this, you can see what it looked like before and after. After, I think it just brought that down enough that it doesn't bother me so much anymore. Alright, so I think the colors in this image look fine to me. Some people might want it a little bit warmer, so the way you would do that is just bring the warmth, like for the temperature slider, just bring it way, way up, and then back off until you feel pretty comfortable with it. I like it pretty neutral, so I think I'm going to stay right there I think that's a little bit warmer than it was to begin with, but I think that looks good. So then, this doesn't really bother me too much. I might even just leave it like this. But the way that I would bring up the exposure around the subjects is the radial filter. I'd use the radial filter. I have a preset that I saved that is basically reducing the contrast, and that's it. Oh no, it reduces the contrast -20, and then it bumps the shadows up +15. And that's it. It's defaulted at a 50% feather. The feather is like, you know, the outside edge of the tool, how much it's feathered. So if you bring it all the way down to 0, I'll do one here so you can see like really dramatically. If I bring the exposure way up, there is a 0 feather here. It's just like a hard edge. If you feather it all the way, then it feathers it out and blends it in. So it's default at 50. Sometimes I have to play around with this and feather it more, just because you don't want like a halo effect, and I'll show you what that means. So backspace just deletes that. I'm going to stick with the regular tool here. I have it set to invert because that way it's only going to affect the area inside the radial filter. If you don't click this, it's going to affect the area outside. So you can see that. So that's my default right here. And what a halo is you'll be able to see, like, well, this one you can't see too much, but you can tell that there's an edge here around where I lightened them, and that's what we want to avoid. So if I go back to the tool, you can spread it out like big time to make it look more natural. You can't see an edge if you do that. You can adjust the feather amount. That can help it not be as noticeable. I'm noticing like on the bridge here that you can see where I've lightened this area and then it gets really dark over here. So I might just spread it out like that. And then if you find that their faces or their skin is still too dark, you can do another one on top of that. But you want to watch the contrast, because if it's super low contrast, it can wash them out, and you don't want them to be washed out when the rest of the image is nice and contrasty. Another trick is that you can actually bring the contrast up for the entire image and then just reduce the contrast on them. But that looks terrible, I think, so we're not going to do that on this one anyways. Oh, what am I doing here? Back to 0. Okay, so the only thing that's bothering me here is this right here. Let me try cropping it out and see if I like that better. Yes. I think that this looks great, so I would just leave it. So the next one, this one's considerably darker. Again, I'm going to bring the exposure up. I'm going to look at the background and get the background where I want it. I'm going to apply the preset, mess with the exposure, maybe bring the warmth up just a tiny bit. Okay, so you can see we've got some highlights on her face, and he's like totally dark, and we want to bring those shadows up, so I'm going to use the radial filter. I'm just going to use my preset that I already have saved here that brings the contrast down, the shadows up a little bit. That made it a lot better, but I think I want more, so I'm going to make another filter. Or another radial filter, and just put it on their faces. I'm going to bring the shadows up. I'm going to bring the highlights down because she has that highlight on her face, and I don't want to really mess with that. And then what this is doing, I can tell, is it's kind of washing out their faces because the contrast is getting lower and lower. And I just want to bring more contrast back. So I'm going to bring the contrast back. but I'm going to bring the exposure up. And then what I'm going to do is hit Control Alt on my PC. I don't know what that is on a Mac, but it basically copies this radial filter, and then I can drag it. I'm going to drag it down here because their arms were like really dark. But I'm seeing like that there's all, you can really tell where the filter edges are. So I'm just going to play around. I don't want there to be a halo, so, and I don't want there to be this dark. You can tell like where the shadows and the radial filter are meeting. I don't like that. So I'm gonna make this really big, and I'm gonna feather it more. That looks really good to me. I think that there's too much of a halo around them. So I'm going to bring the shadows up for the whole image. Bring the exposure down a little bit. And bring the contrast up a little bit. Just a tiny bit. +7. This one I'm going to crop. Maybe right there. Maybe a little more. I think that looks really good. I don't think you can really, maybe over here you can see a dark spot. I might even just do like another radial filter there. Bring it up. Sometimes when you bring up the exposure, it will cool the image off. So, or I mean, I'm sorry, the other way around. It warms it up. So you might have to play around with the temperature to get it to match. But there, I think that looks good. This spot up here is bugging me, so I'm going to crop that out. There. I think that looks really good. Then like this trick that I learned is reference view. Yeah, reference view. So Shift R takes you to reference view. I'm going to drag this first picture, which I really love, into the reference view mode. And then I'm going to click on this picture, and I just want to make sure the tones match. And it looks like they match pretty good, so that's good. So then I'm going to go to the next picture. I'm going to hit D to exit reference mode, or reference view, and we'll click the preset, bring the exposure up. I don't want to bring it up too much because then I'll blow the background out. So I would leave it like this and use my radial tool on them. I'm gonna need to really tweak this, so I'm gonna bring the contrast down more, the exposure up more, shadows up more, and then I'm gonna bring the temperature up a little bit on them. Turn that off. I just want to zoom in and look at how the noise is doing, because when you bring up, you know, really dark parts of the image, you can create a lot of noise. This looks fine to me. It just looks kind of grainy, but that doesn't bother me at all. So I think that's fine. This down here is bothering me because it's a completely different temperature than their faces, so I'm going to create another radial filter and turn, I don't want it to really so much as bring the exposure up as I want to just make it a little bit warmer. There we go. I'm going to crop this in so there isn't so much big white space over their heads. And then I think I'm going to add just one more filter on their faces to bring them up, but I don't want it to be like super noticeable, so just going to play around with these sliders. I'm going to bring the contrast of the whole image up a little bit more. There we go. I think that looks really good. So then let's do the reference view, Shift R, and just make sure the tones match on all of these, and I think they look great. So back to grid view, I think those are great. So that's how I would do that. So you can't see any halos, and everything's just even and looks really nice. If there were noise, I might or I probably would adjust the noise reduction slider. Oh, this is like not wanting to load. But this kind of noise doesn't bother me. It's very even and it just looks like grain, and grain doesn't bother me. So, all right, that's how I do that. Thanks for watching.